To the bill.
To the bill.
And Madam Speaker, may I have permission to use a visual aid?
Representative Benz requests permission to use a visual aid. Seeing no objection, so ordered.
I think he wants it. I'm sorry. That's okay. That's fine. Thank you for your indulgence, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, you should have on your desk a miniature version of this chart. And I want to explain it first. And you'll have to understand that as a lawyer, I am not an engineer, and I certainly didn't do well in art class. So you'll forgive the rudimentary nature of this exercise. So the concept here is simple enough. What we have is a 10-year line on the bottom of the chart, and we have the carbon intensities called out on the left-hand column. So we have a starting point of 89. It's a point something, but I rounded it off. 88 is where corn ethanol rests. Look at that modest little space. And then we drop down to 84, carbon intensity of sugarcane. There's quite a hop there when you go down to sugarcane. And then if we go from 84 down to 80, that is the target. That's actually the reduction that this bill suggests we are going to achieve. I called out the corn ethanol to show just how little good it does, because you can see that when we blend it, we only pick up about a point and something. We pick up very little. We got to get nine points out of this. We get 1. With sugarcane, you do quite a bit better. You actually pick up about 4 some odd points of the necessary 9. When you get past sugarcane, you're in trouble, because there isn't anything yet that works unless it's electric. And if you're fortunate enough to be able to have an electric car, hooray for you. Now, many aren't. The idea over here, too, of this up and down lines is to show the deficit. That is the point where you are still selling this corn ethanol, and you're still selling perhaps sugarcane mixed stuff. But as the amount you can include in it drops, that by amount you can include in it, I mean the carbon intensity, you've got to go find some credits from someplace. Where do you get those credits? Well, you get them from everybody that's below this blue line, everybody over here. And so the idea is that if you enjoy something that's below this line, you get credits. And then these folks over here who continue to sell fuel have to come over onto this side and get them from you. You may recall I mentioned equilibrium. That's a very necessary thing in any market. The demand has to equal the supply, or something bad happens. The price goes up, or the price crashes, depending. Well, we can anticipate in these kinds of, shall we say, man-induced market situations, or maybe I should say credit-induced, that there will be something flawed with the market. And of course, the DEQ understands this and is trying to put different control features in that will assist in addressing this issue. Keep in mind that when we're dealing with credits, it's kind of a long-term thing. And one of the problems with today's bill is that you can see that the actual impact is pushed out. You can see the blue line does not start to actually make a major decline until about 4 or 5 years out. And this means that the consequences of today's vote are delayed. Perhaps time for all of us to leave the building and get far away from it before the consequences of what we vote on today are felt. Perhaps, on the other hand, it's time to get people ready to go buy an electric car. They can look out and say, gee, in 5 years, I'm going to have a different car. Better start saving. Now, the question becomes, do any of the credits go to those who buy electric cars? The answer is yes, kind of. If you have a charger in your house, you can generate your own credits, and they will begin to stack up. Will enough credits stack up so that over on this side of the equation, those folks that are still selling corn ethanol to those who can't afford electric cars, do you think that that will have enough credits to keep that market from going up, that cost? Well, there's the question. That is the question, because nobody knows. And when you engage, or when we as a group engage in these kinds of unknowns, the consequences are almost always bad, because being able to foresee what's going to happen is a necessary thing in a market, or all those people out there that are engaging in free market activities will take advantage of us.
Representative, just so you know, Representative Kennemer has yielded his time. Please continue.
Thank you, Representative. So the question, again, getting back to this chart, it's a pretty rough depiction because it doesn't really show the consequences of the price increase. It merely shows that as time passes and you keep your car, if your car is only capable of burning corn ethanol, you are going to have to pay more and more and more as that carbon intensity drops. And if you're lucky enough to find somebody that has sugarcane, do you think for a minute that those who have it are going to drop their price? The answer is no. What happens when you have fuel is your price will trend up to whatever the credit-induced market drives. So nothing's going to be saved. And this is one of the really unfortunate things about this program. It doesn't save people money, it costs you money, or it doesn't work, because the whole idea is to drive you into something else. Now, when we talk about how much is it going to cost, the answer, I must say, I was very disturbed when I went on the line and looked at the rules that were put together by the DEQ. I was disturbed because they took the cost of the program and they tried to spread it over these years, when in point of fact, the poor person at this point gets to pay all of it. And all of it at that point is actually 19 cents. That's what they think it's probably going to be. That's $500 million a year. $500 million more a year at 19 cents. Who gets that money? Who gets it? The people with the electric car and they plug it in at night, do they get the money? Yeah, they'll get a little of it. Do the natural gas companies get the money? They'll get a lot of it. That's why they're very, very supportive of this program. Will we all be better if we go get natural gas cars? Yeah, I think we will be. There'll be cleaner air, but we'll have to find the money to buy the car. And there's the small matter of the hydrogen-driven cars, which everyone points at. We don't have them yet. And when we do have them, you'll have to go buy them. So the point here is, this concept is flawed in the sense that we've never called out anything beyond the cents per gallon that it's going to cost. It's going to cost everybody more. If there's one message that I'm trying to make in this presentation, it's that. So what is it? What's the good that comes out of this? Why are we doing this? Why are we forcing this upon everybody in Oregon? And that's why I asked the question, has someone gone around and added up everything we've already done? Has someone taken all the efforts this little state has engaged in to make itself cleaner and seen how this stacks on top of that? Anybody done that? The answer is no. And so the incredible amount of hard work and Oregon dollars that have gone into making Oregon cleaner have been ignored. No, this is just, let's do this now, let's stack it on top, and we don't even know what we're stacking on top of. It's really kind of sad, because this is a serious matter. We heard that in the discussion earlier. This is a serious matter. So what exactly happens? I went and I tried to put together the numbers. If this program works, and I have to go through this kind of slowly. There's a 10% reduction in carbon. We have about a third of our carbon footprint in Oregon is by cars. That means that we generate all of 36 million metric tons a year here in Oregon of carbon. 1/3 of that is 12 million metric tons. 10% is 1.2 million metric tons. So if this were to work, we would save 1.2 million metric tons. Big number, huh? But it shrinks when we look at it in light of, let's say, China, who last year created 10,330,000,000 tons. Or how about the USA, which last year created 5,300,000,000 metric tons. But this program will save 1.2 million. At what cost? Well, we already figured that out at the end of the program when we are not yet saving 10%. At what cost? It's going to cost Oregonians $500 million. $500 million to save 1.2 million metric tons. It's really kind of sad. Actually, it's kind of beyond that. So what is the problem with this device other than it's incredibly complex? And I kind of apologize for all the lines and stuff going around, but the idea here is to try to get across how complicated this system is. If in Europe, when they tried this, they gave up, they quit, they moved away from the cap and trade, which this is, and they moved to a carbon tax. Why? Because a carbon tax is open, and they could show everybody what they were doing. This is what we call a stealth tax. Actually, I stole the word. They called it a stealth tax. Why? Because it doesn't really look like a tax. The government...
Representative, one moment, please.
Yes.
Representative Barreto yields his time.
Thank you.
Please continue.
It doesn't really look like a tax. It looks more like just the government telling you to do something, and then you have to pay more. Wait, that is kind of like a tax. So the point is, the government doesn't get the money. Who gets the money? Who gets the money? The money goes to folks that generate credits. Who would that be? It's anybody that sells fuel that's below this blue line.
Representative, one moment. Representative Barnhart, for what purpose are you in the queue?
Madam Speaker, I raise to make a parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry.
Is Senate Bill 324A a bill for raising revenue requiring a 3/5 vote for passage? We're talking about taxes here.
Thank you, Representative. I do have an opinion from Legislative Counsel stating that this bill does not say providing revenue raising that requires approval by a 3/5 majority. This is not a bill for raising revenue, so that is the answer to your question.
Can I continue, Madam Speaker?
Representative Benz, continue.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm tempted to say if it walks like a duck, but I suddenly realized the one that just raised the point of issue might take umbrage at the fact I would raise the issue of a duck. So, moving on. So, what are we trying to do here today? To me, the question is, let's look at the goal of all of us. The goal is to, in some fashion, effectively make the world and Oregon a safer place for our kids. That's our goal, isn't it? At the end of the day, our goal is not to cost our farmers and our ranchers and everybody else money that they don't have, or that people in downtown Portland that don't get around on a pogo stick or a skateboard, the people that actually have to drive to work, the people in Salem or in Eugene, the folks that need to have a car and can't afford it, something that runs on something other than gas with corn ethanol in it. The idea is to help these folks. And the idea is to get it right. This does not get it right. This is an expensive thing. It's going to cost everybody money. The goal is not achieved at all well with this. We can do much better. I urge a no vote.
Colleagues, I want to thank the carrier of the bill for taking the time to answer my questions. I think that is a really important part of our process. Before I ran for office as a citizen, nothing made me angrier than when you'd meet a politician and they would pat voters on the head and tell them what they think you wanted to hear instead of just telling it like it is. It was with that in mind that when I ran for office in 2010, I made very few promises to my constituents and ones that I made a priority to keep. I would have an open door policy, and I've never turned down a single meeting with anyone who's asked to meet with me, even when I knew the conversation was not going to be easy. And colleagues, today we know that this conversation on SB 324 is not an easy one, so I appreciate the debate. People would always get to know where I stand, even if we weren't going to agree, and I think disagreement, like we're hearing today, is a healthy part of our democracy. I would always consider better data in order to make an informed decision, and we're certainly hearing a lot of data thrown around. And as a freshman, I worked on bills to pass hard things like kicker reform. And as a sophomore, I voted myself out of PERS. So we have difficult conversations on this floor every day. And my community supported me on that, and I'm extremely grateful and humbled. But the other commitment I made to my community, that the passage of SB 324 will make it much harder to keep. I've made one other commitment to my community, and the passage of this bill will make it harder for us to keep that commitment. I keep a chart in my office. It's on your floor desk today, and we update it from time to time to keep it current. It starts with the month I declared I would run for office, July of 2010, and the most recent month reflected is January 2015. The chart denotes the statewide number for SNAP recipients by month. 54 months of data, and colleagues, with the passage of SB 324, the odds do not seem to be in our favor in terms of reducing these numbers. In July 2010, we had almost 118,000 Oregonians on food stamps. In discussion after discussion at my neighbor's door, I made a commitment that I would not stop until we moved that dial in favor of lifting low-income Oregonians out of poverty. As a member of the minority party, I have been disheartened to see the dial move, but in the wrong direction. At peak participation under Kitzhaber's governorship, we saw that number swell to nearly 810,000 Oregonians. In January 2015, that number, while reduced, sits uncomfortably at over 775,000 Oregonians. That's nearly 60,000 more people since July 2010 across all of our districts who rely on a government program and what precious little cash they have to feed and take care of their families. In my first question to the carrier, I asked the carrier of the bill about the impact that ethanol production has had on food prices. Last Friday, a bipartisan bill was introduced in Congress by Senator Pat Toomey, the Republican from Pennsylvania, and Senator Dianne Feinstein, a Democratic senator from California, another state that is trying to navigate this low-carbon fuel standard path. Now, it's easy to say that Senator Feinstein is not of my same political persuasion, but I absolutely agree with her statement about why she sponsored the bill. She said, "A significant amount of U.S. corn is currently used for fuel. If that mandate continues to expand towards the full implementation, the price of corn will increase. According to the Congressional Budget Office, that would mean as much as $3.5 billion each year in increased food costs. Americans living on the margins simply can't afford that." She further stated, "Our infrastructure has a ceiling for the amount of corn ethanol that can be used, and we're rapidly approaching it. Companies are physically unable to blend more corn ethanol into gasoline without causing problems for many gas stations and older automobiles." So I want to focus on Feinstein's comments about people living on the margins and their inability to absorb increased food costs created as a result of pushing alternative agriculture-based fuels. Many of you follow along on my Facebook page, and I regularly post about the adventures at the grocery store and in my kitchen. Many of you also know that I used to own a company that focused solely on helping families save money at the grocery store. I also used to run a blog called The Shopping Cart Economist, and I tracked food prices at the macroeconomic market level. The implications for food prices caused by the passage of SB 324 would make an excellent blog post about what has already happened to food prices based on the corn ethanol standard and what will happen when states like Oregon implement risky, unproven legislation like SB 324. I'll give you an example. It's March, and St. Patrick's Day and Easter are right around the corner. Some common holiday staples that Oregon shoppers will put in their cart: corned beef, butter, and eggs. Just a few short years ago, the price of a pound of corned beef could be had for about $1.59 a pound. This year, Oregon shoppers will be lucky if they can find it for under $4 a pound.
Representative, one moment. Representative Neerman cedes his time to you. Please continue.
This year, Oregon shoppers will be lucky if they can find it for under $4 a pound. Butter would run 3 pounds for $5. Has anyone bought butter recently? It's now almost $5 per pound. It takes a savvy shopper some effort to find a pound on sale for $2.99. And eggs, those have gone up as well. What hasn't gone up is the income of Oregonians, and the SNAP program isn't tracking appropriately for inflation, let alone runaway growth in food costs. How does that relate to SB 324? When I was working on my MBA, I got into a debate with a professor. I had posted on a blog post in December 2007 that said food prices in 2008 were going to dramatically rise. I told my professor that I thought we were in a recession. He gave me the technical definition of a recession and replied that while two consecutive quarters of a down GDP indeed might make a recession, a New York roast that had not reached seasonal pricing benchmarks might also mean a recession. That's because nearly every industry which will be affected by bills like this in states with no expertise, every industry in America intersects with your local grocery store. If the cost of agricultural inputs like feed, seed, and fertilizer increase, then so too will the value-added products that your constituents buy. Many of those inputs heavily rely on affordable fuels, not just for their production, but for transportation costs along the production line from raw products to finished goods on a store shelf where our constituents shop. The diminished buying capacity of consumers in our community means that when food prices go up due to transportation and agriculture costs, the consumer is forced to make real decisions about what type of food choices they can afford to make. For middle-class families, it might mean cutting back on organic fruit or non-GMO food purchases. But while they still have enough to feed their families, it will impact their ability to spend disposable income in other sectors of the economy. For impoverished families, it means the choice of skipping a meal or buying very cheap foods with minimal nutritional value. It could also mean the difference of buying food or choosing to pay their rent or keep their heat on. But it's not just the delivery of transportation and agriculture costs reflected in store prices. Every industry touches your community store, so anything government allows to artificially drive fuel prices will have a chilling effect for families. Many organic foods, non-GMO, or fair trade products, particularly those that are imported, will be out of the reach of families trying to make informed grocery purchases. Senator Feinstein's Republican counterpart, Senator Toomey, was also correct in his assertion on their shared bill. The renewable fuel standard requires fuel suppliers to blend millions of gallons of biofuels, most often corn ethanol, into the nation's gasoline supplies. It drives up gas prices, increases food costs, damages cars' engines, and is harmful to the environment. Remember, this is a bipartisan piece of legislation sponsored by two very ideologically diverse U.S. senators who have both come to the same conclusion that unproven fuel standards and their will have impacts on families across the nation. Colleagues, I have tracked food prices for more than a decade. When a natural disaster like the tsunami that wiped out rice crops and caused a worldwide shortage in the marketplace a few years back, it devastated families around the globe. U.S. restaurant owners who specialized in Asian cuisine reported a loss of income for that short period the market was interrupted. Now, that was a natural disaster. It was short, episodic, and the market recovered. When we interrupted the market by rushing corn ethanol production without understanding the consequences, we disrupted the grocery store marketplace for the past decade. The box of cereal that sells for $3.99 used to be 20 ounces. It's now 9 ounces for the same price. And that 20-ounce box is now nearly $6. The bottom line is, and what our congressional counterparts are coming to realize, is something extremely critical for the people we represent, particularly those at the bottom end of the income scale. Our food supply and our fuel supply cannot compete. Food and fuel in a symbiotic relationship is a win for grocery consumers. It keeps prices low and makes it more easy for consumers to make new food choices like organic, non-GMO, or fair trade. It does not work when food and fuel are pitted against each other in a competitive way, and we've seen the results like the ones I've described at your local store. We can expect the negative relationship to increase with the passage of SB 324, and the real losers are our lower-income constituents who now have less buying power and less control over their health when cheap foods are the only food choices they can make. My second question to the carrier was about genetically modified organisms as it relates to fuel production to reach those low-carbon fuel standards.
Representative,
Yes.
one moment. Representative Olson yields his time.
Thank
Please
you.
continue.
So my second question to the carrier was about genetically modified organisms as it relates to fuel production to reach these low-carbon fuel standards. And specifically, I have real concerns about how intensive GMO production for biofuels could encroach on farmland used for non-GMO foods, which could increase the costs and decrease the accessibility of non-GMO foods for Oregon consumers. The fact is, in order to sustain biofuel productions at the level it would take to implement these standards, the low-carbon fuel standards will require high-intensity farming that relies almost singularly on GMO inputs. We have had some pretty robust debates on this floor about GMO agriculture. Oregon voters were nearly split down the middle on a GMO labeling bill in 2014 where the argument to not label only won by a few hundred votes. It was the most expensive ballot measure campaign in Oregon's history. So imagine the surprise of all the folks who voted yes on Measure 92 when they realized that SB 324 will rely on a more intensive use of GMOs and an increased need for farmland to help sustain the biofuel capacity needed to reach the low-carbon fuel standards, and that there will be new concern raised amongst farmers about encroachment on non-GMO farming operations. That is already a hotly debated topic in Oregon without adding to the concerns of citizens on both sides of the GMO issue. But what will happen as farmland across the country is converted to meet energy demands is that the production of non-GMO crops could decrease and the cost of value-added non-GMO products will increase. That means a consumer without the means to make a choice for their family will have less access to foods non-GMO proponents argue are healthier for the individual and the environment. My concerns about the increased production of GMO crops for biofuels has nothing to do with the merits of whether we should or shouldn't produce GMO products for consumption. I shop both conventionally produced foods and organic and non-GMO foods as my budget allows. My concerns stem from SB 324 artificially increasing costs, which means Oregon families will have less resource to make personal food choices for their families. Choice is removed when cost becomes an impediment to making choices. If non-conventionally produced products are indeed better or healthier as their proponents proclaim, then the choice to make those purchases should not be reserved for wealthy individuals only. SB 324 will force some difficult conversations in the near future, both inside and outside of this building, about the rights of a consumer to access foods that are not conventionally produced at a sustainable price. Once again, our food and our fuel supply should never compete. My third question to the carrier was about Oregon's high poverty rate and our struggle to move the dial on unemployment, which is stuck stubbornly higher than the national average. Oregon's efforts to produce green energy jobs has come at an extraordinary cost to Oregon taxpayers. You heard me mention the other day when we had the floor vote to dissolve Cover Oregon that I do not believe Oregon has the managerial capacity nor the skills required to implement large-scale programs and deliver them to Oregon taxpayers in a timely or cost-effective manner. Headlines abound about other failed projects where the legislature and the executive branch took bites at the apple that were too big and in a quest to rush unproven concepts. Rather than working through pilot programs to find scalability that we can roll out to all Oregonians, large-scale programs with poor planning and implementation has cost us untold amounts of money. Cover Oregon, the CRC, Betsy credits, numerous agency software projects, the state radio project, hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars lost on things state government never delivered on. Now, I liken the low-carbon fuel standards to the execution of the Betsy credits, which by all account have been a spectacular failure filled with boondoggles and scams. The difference between the low-carbon fuel standards and the Betsy credits is that the cost to the taxpayer, once this passes, will be very difficult to connect back to our decision at the legislature. The cost increases that an Oregonian will feel won't happen in their tax bill on April 15th. It will be a slow cost creep at the pump in the price of a gallon of milk or a loaf of bread. And who then will they hold accountable? When bills are connected to something tangible that they see was produced by state government, the voters have a mechanism to hold us accountable. By passing off low-carbon fuel standard with no fiscal impact statement and a hidden cost to taxpayers, it's unlikely voters will make the connection that the increased costs they are experiencing aren't because some greedy corporation's desire for profits, but rather a decision to implement yet another untested, unpiloted, and unproven program is what's affecting their wallets. Convenient for campaigns, bad for Oregon taxpayers. When our constituents feel the effects in their checkbooks caused by SB 324, it will be because businesses in Oregon are experiencing increased costs that are being passed on to consumers.
Representative, one moment. Yes. Representative Huffman yields his time. Please continue.
You. As a business owner, I can tell you there are two types of costs that you can try to manage and attempt to remain in business: variable cost and fixed cost. Labor, for most businesses, is a variable cost. If the business can't afford to make ends meet, or if the business has the capacity to automate to reduce costs, then labor is usually the first line item a business will cut, either in the form of hours, benefits, or some combination of both. If I voted yes for this bill, and it meant a constituent of mine lost their job as a result, that would be a difficult thing for me to swallow. In a state where we struggle with high unemployment, increasing the cost of doing business in Oregon through SB 324 would be detrimental at this juncture. One of my promises to my constituents: I would work to pass jobs legislation and make that a priority. When somebody in any of our districts has a job And when someone in any of our districts no longer needs to be one of the 775,000 Oregonians on food stamps, that's a win for my district, and it's a win for the state. So that brings me to my last question to the carrier. What about moving people out of poverty and helping them find upward mobility? SB 324 is a step backward for families, not forward. I grew up in severe poverty. I was asked by the Willamette Week in 2010 what makes me different than the stereotypical Republican. My answer was that I am not opposed to strong social safety net programs. In fact, in this session, there are bills aimed at everything from increasing employment-related daycare expenditures to killing the reduced price meal bracket for school lunch. Having tried to collect nickels from hungry school children as the school food service director, let me tell you, that's not a fun job. So I will be supporting that bill. So on the one hand, we're looking to increase state funds to stave off poverty, but in the same breath, we're deliberating on a bill that will hurt jobs, increase food costs, reduce the buying power of consumers, and send jobs overseas. Colleagues, I have seen some pretty contradictory pieces of legislation in the few terms I've been here, but I've never seen anything like this before, and I'm worried for Oregon's low-income families and those at the lowest end of the middle-class scale. We already have some of the highest income tax brackets in the nation for low-income families. The effects of SB 324 will compound the loss of disposable income available to Oregonians, which hurts families, and I simply can't support that. I've heard talk that SB 324 will create jobs. For whom? I've heard that about solar jobs, wind jobs, and every other form of alternative energy that we've discussed since I've been here. Cool Schools was supposed to create jobs. Maybe there's a few jobs in the mix, but the cost per job based on the taxpayer expenditure hasn't been worth the money. In 2010, right after the election, then Mayor Sam Adams invited members of the legislature from Portland and the surrounding area to come hear his plan for jobs for Portland. And as he talked about jobs, he settled in quite firmly that green jobs and film jobs were the jobs for Portland and where the future was headed. You can imagine I didn't make it through breakfast very long without asking Mayor Adams, what about the Oregonians who will never go into the green energy field? What about their training? What about the access to school to even do those jobs? What about people in East Portland, the neighborhood I grew up in? What was the plan for those citizens, and where were their jobs? And he had no answer. Colleagues, SB 324 may create jobs for a select few, but what about other Oregonians? Where are their jobs? If it drives up the cost for business and the employee's job goes away because their employer can't afford cost increases, then what? That's the prediction for the California Low Carbon Fuel Standards Program, 30,000 to 50,000 jobs lost. Oregon can't afford to sustain similar per capita losses. My kids are the 8th generation of my family to live in this state. 8 generations. Not many people can say that. And I want to see my grandkids be the 9th, and I want to pass to them a state that is beautiful and healthy in the future as it is right now at this moment. I believe in the beauty that is the soul of Oregon. Our open beaches are a hallmark. Our bottle bill, which I voted to expand, is a landmark. We've had thoughtful dialogues on this floor in the 4 years I've been here about how we preserve our environment and balance the environment with other societal needs. And it has yielded compromises forged in bipartisanship. I simply hate that this bill has come forward with no real plan for how to implement the legislation, no fiscal impact statement, even though it will definitely have an incredible fiscal impact that Oregonians in all of our districts will feel. That SB 324 has been pushed forward as a rollout to the entire state instead of a pilot program that we can learn from with acceptable outcomes we can live with. And with no bipartisan spirit that has been the keystone of other important environmental legislation that we've passed on this floor together. We have other bills, particularly some in the alternative forestry legislation this session, like Western juniper and urban forestry, which will have positive environmental impacts and agreed upon consensus that we will be helping the environment. Those bills also have a positive impact for job creation and an eye towards a more sustainable future.
Representative,
Yes.
one moment. Representative Esquivel
Thank
yields
you.
his time. Please
I'm
continue.
almost done. Thank you. So SB 324 does not have those elements. That gives me colleagues, that gives me pause, and I hope it would you too. I have watched us work together through very difficult legislation in the past sessions where we've come together to solve the problem at hand, and I'm disheartened that this bill does not come forward with the same spirit. I started the floor speech with a retelling of promises that I made in my community when I ran for office. My final promise, that I would work to pass bills that bring prosperity to my neighbors, and that I will vote against bills that harm the ability of my neighbors to raise their kids, feed their families, keep a roof over their heads, or keep them moving forward economically. If I could pass a bill that says milk and bread will always be on sale, and that people in my state can afford a chance at a decent and honest life, then I would write that bill. I can't, but I can vote no on SB 324 and then educate Oregonians about how this bill will negatively impact their economic future so they can better prepare for it. My concern is for families who, like Senator Feinstein expressed concern for, are living on the margins, that there is no way to prepare those families for what will inevitably be increased costs and difficult choices for how they spend the limited income they have. I know what it's like to make those choices. I don't wish that anguish on anyone. Colleagues, I appreciate you taking the time to listen. I can welcome the continued dialogue, but I caution that unlike the hugely expensive mess created by Cover Oregon, this time on this bill, outside of the public purview, there is no shutoff valve. There is no revisiting by the legislature. There is no accountability to the taxpayer. There is no stopping the bleeding once Oregon families are hit with hidden costs at the pump, increased prices at the store, and the very real threat that their job could leave Oregon or simply go away. I will leave you with one last takeaway. There seems to be an expectation by non-legislative proponents of SB 324 that the voting for green energy and clean fuels bills, Oregon will be at the bleeding edge of technology and environmental public policy. Well, the bleeding edge of energy-efficient technology cannot be found in Oregon, not when we've seen failure after failure in green energy projects, with little accountability to the taxpayer for the heavy losses we've incurred. We talk a lot about job creation and courting green companies to our state. If we really want to be impactful on that front, then let's consider the legislation that will make Oregon a leader. SB 324 is not that legislation. Consider this. Tesla Motors, which produces electric cars, some of which can be spotted right here in this Capitol, has a vision of bringing the cost of electric vehicles to a reasonable price so everyday Americans can have that option in their consideration set as they make the decision to purchase a new automobile. Unfortunately for me, Tesla has yet to produce an electric minivan. So, like many of my soccer mom friends, we'll be stuck in vehicles that will be penalized by SB 324. But Tesla Motors, as they look to create a gigafactory that would yield 6,500 family wage jobs, didn't look at Oregon. In fact, it's unlikely Oregon was ever in the mix. And in fact, it's highly likely we were not prepared to accommodate Tesla as they move forward with proven and successful technology. Tesla needed 700 acres of site-ready industrial land. They wanted a tax climate that was favorable to the massive growth they're about to experience, one that would reward capital cost they were about to invest in a new state. They needed a DEQ process that would be favorable to siting energy storage facilities so they could make their batteries at the factory on site. They wanted a state that would allow for factory direct sales. And they needed a skilled and educated workforce to meet the demand of where this truly bleeding edge technology is going to drive the market and reduce our dependence on fossil fuels from foreign lands. Nowhere in their list of requirements to site a new facility as they picked a state was that the state had to have enacted a low carbon fuel standard. And in fact, Oregon, supposedly one of the greenest states in the nation, was never referenced anywhere as being in Tesla's consideration set for the siting of their facility and delivering 6,500 family wage jobs to their new community. Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and even their home state of California were all in the running. They landed in Nevada, not the greenest of states by any stretch of the imagination. What this tells me is that if Oregon is going to be bold and visionary about green energy, then SB 324 is the wrong vehicle to attract cutting-edge companies and sign them on the dotted line to be Oregon companies. Colleagues, we can do better, and I urge a no vote on SB 324.
To the bill.
Colleagues, I ask those questions because, am I still on? There we go. I believe it's clear that Oregon, and if in fact we partner, or if the rest of our West Coast partners are also adopt similar regulations, that for just our states alone, the world is going to have a very, very difficult time satisfying and providing the appetite that there will be, or the mandates that there will be for providing alternative fuels. And I'm going to explain in my next couple of pages here exactly what I'm talking about. You know, the low carbon fuel standard was originally passed in 2009, and we've heard arguments today from the proponents of the policy that there's really no need to question or examine the underlying principles because the low carbon standard has now been with us for 6 years, and carbon emissions continue to grow worldwide, so we must move forward now because it'll be good for the planet. But 6 years is a long time. And there have been some pretty significant changes since 2009 in our world. Thanks to smart drilling techniques, the U.S. now has the ability to influence the price of petroleum in the world. The huge amounts of gas and oil that we are producing domestically have dramatically changed the energy landscape that existed in 2009. The fear that once gripped this nation in the early years of this century regarding energy independence, and that led then President Bush to strongly push for increasing biofuel production as a means of strengthening our national defense, are really no longer valid. But the Low Carbon Fuel Standard Bill in 2009 was really a reaction to this attitude. We wanted to do something. We wanted to try to create our own homegrown energy economy. But there have been some other very, very important changes as well in the last 6 years. You see, the world's experience with and attitudes about biofuels to supplement traditional fuel products have changed dramatically as well. I call your attention to a report or a story that was in the New York Times on January 28th of this year. Maybe some of you had a chance to see this, but the headline says, "New report urges Western governments to reconsider the reliance on biofuels." First, it starts by this. It says, Western governments have made a wrong turn in energy policy by supporting the large-scale conversion of plants to fuel and should reconsider that strategy, according to a new report from a prominent environmental think tank. Quote, "I would say that many of the claims for biofuels have been dramatically exaggerated," says Andrew Steer, president of the World Resources Institute. I might add parenthetically, this is the same institute that former Portland Mayor Sam Adams is now employed by. A global research organization based in Washington that has published this report. Quote, "There are other more effective routes to get to a low-carbon world. Moreover, biofuels are an inefficient way to convert sunlight to fuel, meaning an immense amount of land is required to supply a significant fraction of global energy demand. That land will also be needed to help meet a global appetite for food that is expected to rise by 70% or so by 2050. We've only got one planet with only so much land. If you use land for one purpose, you can't use it for another." Global opinions are changing, Oregonians. We have to understand that. Sometimes we get locked in this building. We end up with a bit of a bubble mentality, and we forget what's going on out there. But the civilized world is moving away from biofuels as a means to meet energy demand. Because when some of the biofuels that now are available don't meet DEQ's new guidelines, i.e. corn ethanol, where will we turn? We just heard cellulosic ethanol mentioned as an example. The main source for cellulosic ethanol that's on the market today comes from sugarcane. The primary source for the derivation of this, or the derivative of this cellulosic ethanol, comes from sugarcane grown in Brazil. Sugarcane is not a naturally appearing crop in Brazil, but they're growing a heck of a lot of it as they clear-cut the rainforest to plant sugarcane so that we can use that product in our gas tanks here in North America. And that's a fact. But I thought Senate Bill 324 was about clean fuels, right? I mean, it has this kind of feel-good component to it. I mean, who doesn't want clean water, clean air? Those of us who camp out here all week long are happy to have clean socks, too, I might add. But as we examine the full story behind clean fuels, we begin to encounter real peoples whose lives are being impacted in some very negative ways by this mass conversion of traditional food products into biofuels for Western fuel tanks. I'd like to reference another New York Times story, recent New York Times story. The headline here says, "As biofuel demand grows, so do Guatemala's hunger pangs."
Representative, excuse me for a moment. You distracted me with the sock comment. Representative Post yields his time. Please continue.
Thank you, Representative. Appreciate that. Dateline, Guatemala City. In the tiny tortillerias of this city, people complain ceaselessly about the high price of corn. Just 3 years ago, 1 quetzal, that's the Guatemalan dollar, it's about 15 cents, bought 8 tortillas. Today it buys 4. And eggs have tripled in price because chickens eat corn feed. Meanwhile, in rural areas, subsistent farmers struggle to find a place to sow their seeds. On a recent morning, Jose Alvarado was harvesting his corn crop on the narrow median of Highway 2 as trucks raced by on both sides. We're farming here because there is no other land available. I have to feed my family, he says, pointing to his sons who are 4 and 6 but appear to be much younger, a sign of chronic malnutrition. Recent laws in the United States and Europe that mandate the increasing use of biofuel in cars have had a far-flung ripple effects, economists say, as land once devoted to growing subsistence foods for humans now sometimes is used much more profitably for churning out vehicle fuel for North America. In a country where most families must spend about 2/3 of their income on food, the average Guatemalan is now hungrier because of biofuel development. This is from the New York Times. This isn't any right-wing rag. This is the New York Times. Roughly 50% of the nation's children are chronically malnourished, the 4th highest rate in the world, according to the United Nations. This is the UN. There are pros and cons to biofuel, but not here, said Miguel Gonzalez, a labor union representative for Guatemalan's farmers. These people don't have enough to eat. They need food. They need land. They can't eat biofuel, and they don't drive cars. So this is about clean fuels. Some of you are old enough to remember the phrase back in the 1960s where we were referred to as the ugly Americans. And in that day and age, it was because of some of our imperialistic foreign policy ventures where we would throw our muscle around probably a little bit more than we should have. But I guess as I examine this bill and I think about the potential global impacts and the human impacts, I wonder if Oregon's passage and perhaps other states' adoption of clean fuels legislation will lead to the next generation of ugly Americans. This is about a global issue. The bumper sticker says, what? Think globally, act locally. I fear that we have our priorities out of order when we champion issues like Senate Bill 324. Turning food into fuels was yesterday's ideas, colleagues. It may have made sense or have been a shiny object back in 2009, but the world is moving beyond quickly. The last thing I would like for this state to do is adopt a policy that will be discredited as wasteful and have a negative impact on our climate and on our world in another couple of years. Let me just give you an example of what can happen and what really, though, is happening across this state and across this nation. Some of you may have mentioned or noticed that I've got a new vehicle that's in my parking spot in the garage. You don't see my white four-wheel drive Dodge pickup there this session. I've got a Prius. And I chose a Prius because I can do some basic math. And the advantage of getting 51 mpg on my round trip between Hood River and Salem is it pencils out a little bit better than 15 gallons mpg. I don't know what the math equals, but that's a pretty significant reduction in my carbon footprint. And these kind of decisions are happening across Oregon. They're happening across the U.S. by the hundreds and thousands. Because it makes sense, because consumers are saying, I want to do the most efficient thing. I want to take actions that are good for the planet. I can afford to do this. The technology is affordable. I'm going to do it. Oregonians are lowering their carbon footprint every day by making personal decisions, not because they have to, but because it's in their best interest and they want to be good people. So colleagues, I would just in closing just say, please don't be blinded by the glitter that comes from this shiny object that's known as the Clean Fuels Bill. Because the more you look at it, the luster becomes more tarnished, and it becomes a really bad idea for Oregon. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, to the bill.
To the bill.
First of all, Madam Speaker, I want to thank you personally and other members of this body for allowing and encouraging an open and full debate on this issue. I think it speaks to our democracy and the way things work in the state that we can continue to have a very cordial and educated debate on a very important issue. That being said, I'm going to urge your no vote on this bill for a few simple reasons. First of all, DEQ, our own agency, under their own studies, has predicted an increase to the cost of consumers, your constituents and my constituents, of between 4 and 19 cents per gallon. Our own agency is predicting an increase in cost. Gas will cost more, according to the predictions. Second, even if the program works as intended, it will have no meaningful effect on the cleanliness of our air or upon the cleanliness and the reduction of carbon in the environment. Third, it won't work because this is a Rube Goldberg machine of epic proportions. And DEQ has had years to implement this program. That is why we have a sunset on the bill, so we can see how it works before lifting a sunset. And it has not worked. It has not been fully implemented. And finally, even if it were to work under the credit systems, the cost to consumers, to your constituents, to my constituents, won't go to improve our roads, our infrastructure. It will simply go to private companies. 4 reasons. It's going to raise the cost for consumers and our constituents. It's going to have no meaningful effect on the environment. It won't work because of its complexity, as has been demonstrated by DEQ's own track record. And any money generated by this program won't go to our roads or our infrastructure, but will simply go to private companies. For those reasons, I would ask for your no vote on this bill. And I'm going to punctuate a little bit of what I say with some things from constituents, actual constituents. Many of you know that I've sent out a newsletter, got a couple hundred or maybe even up to 1,000 responses about this. And some of those responses from our own constituents I think are worth reading. One constituent says, the low carbon fuel standard is a way to bleep the people that are barely making ends meet. Most people in this state are recovering from a recession and are working part-time because they can't get a decent job. The economy is still struggling. Some people can barely afford to pay their bills. Now, gas prices have finally gone down, but it's on its way up. Utilities have gone up. Taxes have gone up. Everything has gone up. Oh, now you want to charge Oregon consumers the low carbon fuel standard. That's from a constituent responding to a summary of this program. Colleagues, I've spent a significant amount of time on this bill. It's actually been a fairly enjoyable and experience to dive deep into the policy. And the first thing I would commend to you is to read the bill. We have continually been told this is simply the lifting of a sunset on an existing program. First, the program has not been implemented, as we discussed. And second, this is not simply a lifting of a sunset. If you read the bill, you have all read lifting of sunset bills. We have all read them. They're short. They're usually one line, changing a sunset date. This bill is many pages of substantive changes to the low carbon fuel standard, a lifting of the sunset indefinitely, and then deferring our authority as a legislature to DEQ and the Commission to make extremely large changes in the program without a requirement to come back to the legislature and ask for approval of those changes. And that's all if the program works, which, as DEQ has demonstrated, they cannot show that it has worked. I want to go back to, again, the costs, representatives, colleagues, the costs to your consumers, to your constituents, to Oregonians. DEQ's own predictions, minimum 4 cents a gallon, up to 19 cents a gallon. Other studies showing over $1 a gallon. Let's just go on the low end. Under the existing method of raising revenue under the gas tax, 4 cents a gallon is $100 million a year. That is an additional cost, minimal of 4 cents a gallon for our constituents that won't be going to our roads, our bridges, and our infrastructure. Minimum of 4 cents a gallon. I'm also extremely concerned that we are relying on both the science and the climate strategies of last decade, as was very eloquently discussed earlier. Can I get a yield?
Sorry, I was so engrossed. Sorry. Do I have a yield? Representative Stark yields his time. Representative Davis, please continue.
Thank you. As was so eloquently discussed earlier, we are relying upon the climate science of the last decade with the low carbon fuel standard. The most cutting edge is telling us that requiring a low carbon fuel standard simply results in fuel shifting, simply results in additional use of farmland throughout the world in some of the poorest countries to produce so-called cleaner, lower carbon fuels. Let's talk about land use. Everybody loves land use, right? We were told that we would have projections on the land use impact of the LCFS. Do we have those projections from DEQ? No, we don't. We do not have those projections. In fact, what has DEQ said? They have said that they can't even make those projections, that this is such a complex program, they don't even have the ability to make the land use projections. So while nationally, environmentalists are warning us about the effects of low carbon fuel standards on land use, on farms, on forests, on low income and poverty-stricken countries, we are, if we adopted this bill, moving forward without a sunset date on a program that could have an indeterminate or negative impact on our land use system, on our farms, on our forests. Let's go back to our constituents. Don't worry, I've only got about 999 more emails to go through. Kyle writes, Representative Davis, thank you for your information concerning Oregon's low carbon fuel standard. In my opinion, the best course would be to allow the current legislation to sunset as scheduled. A prudent course of action, colleagues, would be to vote no on Senate Bill 324A. Let the program sunset. Let's adopt a strategy that will have a meaningful impact on carbon reduction in the state of Oregon and around the world, without costing your constituents and my constituents and consumers in Oregon more money at the pump at a time when they've already seen gas prices jump precipitously. I want to talk about stacking for a moment, Madam Speaker and colleagues. Stacking. We've been told this program is absolutely necessary to garner lower carbon fuels in the state of Oregon. But what are we already doing? Oregon has a cleaner fuels program, a renewable fuels standard already. The federal government has a renewable fuels standard that requires the blending and use of cleaner fuels when they are available commercially. Representative Bentz eloquently discussed the fact that we have program on top of program on top of program that costs Oregon something, but apparently we haven't taken up the time to add up that cost. So instead, if we were to adopt Senate Bill 324A, we would add an additional direct cost on our consumers with no measurable impact on the environment. Cost with no impact. Cost with no impact on our environment. Colleagues, I'll end by going through 998 emails for you. No, I won't. Dean writes, I'm tired of paying a premium for negligible results. Colleagues, increased cost to consumers. No meaningful impact on our environment. I like how this Dean put it, a negligible impact, negligible results. A program that won't work, that has not worked because of its extreme complexity that DEQ has not even yet implemented. And finally, the costs for our consumers, not going to our roads, our bridges, our infrastructure, but going to private companies for their own gain. Colleagues, thank you for your time. Thank you for the robust debate. Madam Speaker, thank you for the open debate today. I urge your no vote on Senate Bill 324A.
Thank you, Representative. Further.
You know, global climate change surely is real. And America and certainly Oregon needs smart and effective policies to combat it. Oregon adopting an even lower carbon fuel standard is neither smart nor effective. It raises fuel prices for Oregonians, hiding a 4 cent to possibly even over $1 a gallon tax every time Oregonians fill up at the pump.
Representative, just for the record, I would clarify that this bill does not raise revenue. It is not a tax bill, so please be careful.
Thank you. But what it does is promise another risky taxpayer-financed energy jobs scheme having zero credibility, especially from a state government that has presided over a scandalous and perhaps even criminal waste of tax credit giveaways that have mostly benefited out-of-state corporations and well-heeled investors at the expense of Oregon taxpayers and more important funding priorities like K through 12. And we've learned today we can't even put a price tag on how much that's been over the last several years. Rather than forcing Oregonians to pay higher fuel prices and finance even more risky corporate welfare, Oregon should do its part in combating global climate change by investing in university research for cleaner fuels, reducing energy use, and a smarter transportation funding mechanism. Bottom line, colleagues, the costs of this bill are local, real, and immediate. And unfortunately, the benefits are uncertain, long-term, and will mostly go to those outside of Oregon. I urge you to vote no. Thank you.
I'd like to take a moment, and I'm not going to take long here today, to read testimony from someone who actually is in the cattle business, who is in a business that not many of us here in this building can relate to. I'd like to read a bit of that testimony from this individual. The increased cost of LCFS will threaten the economic viability and continuity of our family ranch. Everything in our rural community requires extended distances for delivery, from fencing supplies to seed to fertilizer, plus the multitude of other inputs needed for efficient cattle production, even down to the groceries we buy. Today, this individual says, I traveled 324 miles to testify at this hearing. Distances of 150 miles are common for the movement of our cattle to pasture and delivery of our cattle and commodities. If LCFS is imposed, we'll have great difficulties. The financial margin of ranching operations is thin because of the risk of weather and tremendous capital outlays required, along with the exposure and volatility of the markets. The LCFS will most definitely diminish our chance at profitability and continuing economic stability. Already we endure the consequences of the current ethanol blend gasoline and biodiesel mixture. We cannot use E10 gasoline in our irrigation or small engine equipment, as the corrosive effects of the ethanol will ruin the engine components, which means downtime and expensive repairs. We currently have to special purchase ethanol-free gasoline, which at times can be $1 or more per gallon increase over regular ethanol-blended gas. Consider this. In November 2014, we experienced minus 15-degree weather. The current biodiesel mixture we have to use in our cattle feeding equipment gelled, and our diesel-powered tractors would not start or run. Only after a multitude of fuel filter changes and many hours of mechanical work with external heat applied, we were able to get our cattle fed. Well over 1,000 head of cattle were dependent on our ability to feed and take care of them through those terribly cold days. This is a responsibility of animal husbandry, and we take that very seriously. Now I'd like to take a moment to talk about a subject that is not extremely popular here. It was only a few days ago, colleagues, that we took the time to honor someone who had served this chamber selflessly for many, many years. In the course of those accolades, the love and respect for this place and the process was mentioned numerous times. And today we have an opportunity to show the same kind of love and respect for the legislative process. Colleagues, I'm sure that all of you honor this place, and I know that you feel privileged to serve here. Today, we have the opportunity to keep this honor intact, and with the legislative process as well. When the heart of Senate Bill 324 became subject of federal suspicion, even mentioned by name in a federal subpoena, it seemed it was the perfect time to send this bill away. The perfect time. A new governor, a new way of doing business, cutting the ties to corporate cronyism, and getting rid of every appearance of wrongdoing. Restoring the public trust is a phrase that I heard. Restoring the public trust. What a beautiful aim and goal for all of us here in this chamber. But so far, it is a missed opportunity. But being an eternal optimist, I'm believing that many of you, in your heart of hearts, really want to restore public trust. And you know that this is a golden opportunity to do that. Colleagues, it does matter what it looks like as we do business in this building. News outlets all over Oregon have fulfilled their obligations to readers, viewers, and their hearers, trying to flag this body down on this issue. This is Oregon. This is not Illinois. This bill, like many around here, accentuates the urban-rural divide, and once again, rural Oregon gets an elbow to the side of the head.
Excuse me, Representative. Representative Fagan, for what purpose are you in the queue?
Madam Speaker, I would ask you to please advise the representative to please not impugn the motives of the entire body or of other members. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Wilson, you are skating close to being reprimanded. Please be careful.
Thank you. Bicycles, public transit, and electric cars are not big in a wide expanse of rural Oregon, and they never will be. Scores of aging internal combustion engines will continue to do the heavy lifting in feeding Oregon's residents, especially urban residents. Oregon farmers operate on a tight margin and are extremely sensitive to fuel price increases. These increased prices cannot be easily passed on to the consumer, most of them in the urban area. Urban dwellers, by comparison,
Excuse me, Representative. My apologies. Representative Hack yields her time. Please continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Urban dwellers, by comparison, have better roads generally to drive on and generally shorter distances to travel. They can rely on public transit, including trolleys, buses, and bicycles, and goodness knows, cowboy boots and bicycles don't mix, especially in rural Oregon. Oregonians know that the low-carbon fuel standard will drive up their fuel costs, and media outlet after media outlet has warned the public about that. This is one of those bills where you have to pass it to know what it does. And we're about ready to design another Da Vinci airplane, and I think we've done enough of that in Oregon lately. I hope you'll please vote no on Senate Bill 324A. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
There's been great debate today. A lot of great points have been made, many times over the same points. I hope I won't bore you here. I will be brief. I'm basically going to throw away my notes here and just go from the heart and from my experience as a father, a young father, and as a business person. When I decided to run for office, the sole inspiration for me was my son Elias. When I announced my campaign, he would not be yet born for 3 more months, but he was still mine nonetheless. And I am blessed to be the son of a great man, in my estimation, who has always put my needs before his own. He's always given me his time. He's always given me his full investment. So as a parent, there is nothing that will get in my way of making sure that I take care of in only the best way of my son, and consequently your children and grandchildren, because they're all part of the same generation. It's been my business experience of over 10 years now, since I graduated high school, that when fuel prices go up, shipping prices go up. I originally started as a sod farmer way back when, and I recall when I was very young when the fuel prices skyrocketed. Diesel went through the roof, well in excess of $4 a gallon. I can remember my little F-150 pickup costing me over $100 to fill up a 24-gallon tank. I can recall spending nearly $800 to fill up my Freightliner transportation vehicle, my tractor trailer that would transport the sod. Those were very difficult times for me. And as a small business entrepreneur, it was actually very difficult for me to compete in the open market because as a small farm, I just wasn't established enough to actually deal with the market pressures. My much larger, but yet very high quality competition was able to handle the additional costs much better than I was. There were times where even though it was just myself and one other employee, I didn't know if I'd be able to stay in business because of the added fuel costs. Thank goodness I scratched my way out of it because, again, of the parents I'm blessed to have who taught me great principles of work ethic, how to save, how to invest. I was able to scratch a living out of this, and I was able to get through the tremendous high gas prices and diesel prices. What I'm concerned about is that this bill, if it moves forward, this program, will most certainly impact those of us who struggle with income the most, those of us who have the least discretionary income. I'm concerned that young adults, all the way down to my little Elias, who will be two years old in a few months, are going to have an even harder time than I did to rise up through the ashes. I come from a good family of business people, but the fact of the matter is I didn't spend a day in college. I chose my own way. School was restrictive for me, and I wasn't a very good student, but I was taught to think outside of the box, to work hard. But I am honestly telling you that I have great concerns that this program, if it does move forward today, is going to make it that much harder for the next generation to establish themselves. And that's what we're really all here for, is it not? I know every single person in this building has only the best intentions. I really do believe that about you folks. Regardless of your location in the state, whether you're Democrat or Republican, you want the best for my son and his generation. I want clean air. You want clean air. But we have to be able to afford the transition to that kind of economy. And I'm deeply concerned that this program outpaces our ability to pay for it. I'm also concerned that, because as a business person, realize someone who in the past has had very, very minimal capital to invest, I've had to think very hard about how I was going to invest that money. Where was the best investment?
Excuse me, Representative.
Yes.
Representative Hayden yields his time. Please continue.
Thank you. So I take this matter extremely seriously, that in our quest, our common quest, to create a clean environment for the next generation, we think very carefully about how we invest their money, because it will be their money someday. If they're not already as teenagers earning an income, the toddlers that we love to watch run around, they'll be earning an income someday, and it'll be their income that we'll be putting at risk. And I want to make sure that in our quest to create a clean environment, we do not destroy that economy that must remain healthy if we are able to both transition into a cleaner burning cars, cleaner burning diesel trucks, as Representative Johnson alluded to with the company that's creating that magnificent engine. We have to be able to afford those technologies. And if we waste our investment on programs that, in my estimation, from sitting on the Energy and Environment Committee, do have a minimal impact at best, but a high cost, I'm concerned that we'll be making the wrong investment, because we do not have an unlimited amount of resources. So we have to be choosy in how we invest it. So, being the representative from District 2, which is Roseburg down to just this side of Grants Pass, I represent rural Oregon. And I can tell you that my constituents are not pleased with this bill, that my constituents, like myself, sometimes begin to lose hope, because it does not seem like the rest of the state cares about our people and their problems. I think this bill will disproportionately, if that's the right word, affect my constituents. I can remember when I was first starting out in my business, I would drive a 46-mile round trip. That hasn't been the case since I became employed here at the State House. I drive, I think, about maybe 2 miles round trip. And so it's going to have a very deep impact on the people in my community. And I just want us to think very hard and deep before we cast this vote about what kind of an impact it will have on them, because they're people just like us. And I know that you appreciate that fact. So please think long and hard before you hit that green or that red button. How is this going to affect all of Oregon? And In our quest for clean air, finally, is this the best investment? I urge your no vote on Senate Bill 324-A. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion. Representative Gilliam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before we go to the bill, I'd like to suspend the rules to introduce my intern. Oh, he's left mine. To the bill.
To the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In my second term, I was driving here to the Capitol, and one of my children must have been using my car because OPB was on. And they announced that there was a recall by Toyota on Priuses because of a very serious brake problem. And you know I would never wish harm on you or anyone on your side of the proverbial aisle. And yet I have to admit, knowing how many Priuses were in your stalls in the basement, I thought for a moment, this may be my party's only chance to gain power. But that didn't happen. Times have changed. And to my shock today, my good friend from Mount Hood and the Gorge announced that he drives a Prius now. Times have changed since we've implemented policies, environmental policies, cleaner policies, low carbon fuel policies. We have much to be proud of in Oregon. But when I hear us talk about how proud we are of what we've done and of American studies, I think it was the representative from the biogas district that mentioned this, I have to remind us to compare Oregon's economy to China. More importantly, compare our economy to China. And China, by unfathomable numbers, is belching CO2 into the air. We pale to China, and yet we're so proud, and we should be, of certain aspects of our environmental policy. I've read reports where China is opening a coal plant every 10 days. If we shut down the coal plants in Kentucky and West Virginia, we would do nothing but obliterate Appalachia and pump up the Chinese economy. So I believe we have to look at balance. And my question would be today, at what point is there a tipping point? At what point do we overreach? At what point do we congratulate ourselves and break our arm patting ourselves on the back about policies that, yes, we should be proud of? But when is the overreach? When is the tipping point? When does what we're doing have nothing to do with the reality of what China is doing for clean air? Maybe it's courageous to vote for this bill. Maybe it's the right thing to do. Maybe it'll make us feel good. But at what point is it not worth it? Where is the bill that we overreach, that we fool ourselves, that we reach the tipping point? And for me, it's Senate Bill 324. And I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Why postpone? Because there are two things that we face, colleagues. Two decisions to make. One is about the process, and the second is about the policy. The reason why I advocate today that we postpone is because I don't believe that this body should, at this time, make this decision to make permanent this controversial program because of what we know going on in the executive branch and what we don't know. Oregonians are frustrated. Permission to use a visual aid.
Representative McLean asks permission to use a visual aid. Seeing no objection, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, as you know, I sent you a letter on February 18 urging that the vote that we're having today be postponed. Permission to read that letter.
Feel free.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Due to the many investigations surrounding Sylvia Hayes for, among other things, lobbying the former governor and influencing state agencies on the development of the Clean Fuels program, and whether that influence violated ethical and criminal laws, House Republicans request that any vote in the House of Representatives on Senate Bill 324 be postponed until all investigations are complete and the information derived therefrom made public. This is the only way that House members can evaluate Senate Bill 324 on the merits of the program alone, and without this fog around how it was created. As you may have pledged in the past, Madam Speaker, the House must be transparent and fully involve the public in our review of bills. Senate Bill 324 does not meet that standard. Do we know how the Clean Fuels program was influenced by Ms. Hayes and who paid her to do it? Do we know how those who paid Ms. Hayes benefit from a permanent Clean Fuels program? Do we know who else in state government may have violated state or federal laws as to this program? What other out-of-state interests have invested money to promote this program, and how would they benefit from its passage? There are many more questions to ask. Shouldn't the public know of those facts, before the House votes to implement such a controversial program that will undoubtedly raise fuel prices for all Oregonians? With criminal subpoenas just issued that cover numerous persons and agencies, we must allow the investigative process to take place before we vote on Senate Bill 324. I concluded, today, Governor Brown said, we must seize this moment to work across party lines to restore the public's trust. In that spirit, please let me know whether you will agree to hold any vote on Senate Bill 324 until the public and House members have the information outlined above. With 5 months left in the session, why would we rush this bill through the House? Madam Speaker, I appreciate that you send a letter back to me, very cordial, disagreeing that the House should put this on hold. Indeed, after I sent that letter, there have been some questions about the very premise, about why we should put this on hold, and I want to address some of those. The first is the frustration of Oregonians that we are even proceeding today. Behind me are just examples of editorial headlines that range from Portland to Eugene to the Portland Tribune, Albany Democrat Herald, urging us to put this on hold. Here are some of the quotes from the headlines, colleagues, of local editorial boards from Oregon newspapers asking us not to vote on Senate Bill 324 at this time. The Albany Democrat Herald wrote, in addition, the Clean Fuels program is exactly the sort of consulting.
Excuse me, Representative. Representative Krieger yields his time. Please continue.
Thank you. Exactly the sort of consulting that Kitzhoffer's fiancée, Sylvia Hayes, was tackling. You would think the scandal would give lawmakers ample reason to steer clear, for the time being, of anything that might have Hayes' fingerprints on it. The Oregonian wrote, quote, "Despite the cost and complexity of the fuel standard, removing the 2015 sunset date has continued to be a priority of the environmental left. Kitzhopper, in a nonprofit that sent tens of thousands of dollars to fiancée Sylvia Hayes' way. There is no question that the policy encoded in Senate Bill 324 is enveloped thoroughly by the ethical fog generated by Oregon's outgoing first couple." The Oregonian further wrote, "Supported tainted legislation that affected good policy would be bad enough. Supporting tainted legislation that creates bad policy and hinders the pursuit of good policy would be inexplicable. Supporters of Senate Bill 324 should be prepared for some hard conversation with constituents." And the Portland Tribune writes, "It has become impossible to separate Kitzhopper's push for reduced carbon standards from Hayes' paid work on behalf of advocates of those standards." The Statesman Journal writes, "If Senate Bill 324 is as worthwhile as supporters contend, there's no need to rush it in the legislature. There will be time for the potential effects to be validated by reputable, independent, disinterested analysts who have no political, ideological, or financial interests in the outcome. Legislators should have learned from the Cover Oregon debacle that trying to be a national leader without doing the proper homework and supervision can backfire badly." That was a quote from Slow Down, Oregon Legislators on Greenhouse Gas Bill from the Statesman Journal on February 4 of this year. Oregonians are frustrated, Madam Speaker. They're frustrated and they want this bill put on hold. The motion to postpone comes at this time after a rigorous debate when it's clear that many questions remain. And we need to know who influenced who, and was that influence improper or illegal? Some of the other objections that have come up about postponing it. Madam Speaker, may I read from the floor exhibit?
Go right ahead.
Thank you. The floor exhibit that I just mentioned, folks, colleagues. The Oregon Department of Environmental Quality's website. Now, my good friend from Beaverton, Representative Reed, and I were on television together. He is tall and nice looking, and sitting next to me made me look short and fat. But nevertheless, we had a rigorous debate. But Representative Reed said then, "It's been going since 2009. Governor Kulongoski passed this. There's no reason for delay." My good friend from Ashland, our Ways and Means chair, a man I admire, also has said repeatedly, "There's no need to delay. This has been going since 2009. The chair of our very committee that held just one hearing, and then the next hearing moved the bill, said it's been going for 6 years. And yet the very DEQ says clearly on their website that the history of the Oregon Clean Fuels Program began in 2009 by a bill that simply said, we need to do this. But of course, it never said, what are we going to do? And the reason we should postpone this bill today is because the history of this program emanates only in the last few years. The history of what we should do, not whether this program should exist, but what's it going to do to your family and my family and your community and my community?
Representative, one moment. Representative Parrish yields her time. Please continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If you look at this handout, it says clearly, It was in April 2012 that Governor Kitzhaber asked DEQ to begin the rulemaking process for the Oregon Clean Fuels Program. Begin. And as you can see from these dates, on December 7, 2012, Phase 1 rules came out. And on January 7, 2015, not yet 2 months ago, Phase 2 rules came out. So this program doesn't come from Governor Kulongoski. The bill to direct DEQ to tell us what this program does came by directive in 2009 by this body. The program and how it affects your family and my family, those rules are fairly recent. And they came out in a time in which a cloud, as the Oregonian put it, had emerged. I want to point out, colleagues, that other floor letters, like from the Oregon Business Association, and I quote from the OBA's letter, "As leaders in the Oregon business community, we have evaluated the Clean Fuels Program beginning in 2009. I got to wonder what they were reading in 2009, in 2010, in 2011, in 2012, because it wasn't in 2012 that this program started its process of figuring out these rules. So, the next criticism of why we should not delay has been there's no reason, there's no connection to any of the governor's behavior or his administration or Ms. Hayes to Senate Bill 329. In fact, I want to quote the majority leader of the Senate, a Portland Democrat named Diane Rosenbaum. She said, "This is nonsense. There is no link between Sylvia Hayes and the Clean Fuels programs. It's nonsense." Multiple environmental groups have come out and said there's absolutely no link, no evidence between Ms. Hayes and the Clean Fuels program. This is simply political posturing. Well, colleagues, there is evidence, and I want to methodically go through it to show that this bill must be postponed. Colleague, there's things that we know and things that we don't know. This is what we know. Number one, Ms. Hayes was paid by interested parties to lobby in favor of the Clean Fuels program. We know this. Ms. Hayes has indicated in an email that, despite resistance, was recently released, where she indicated that she was one of the originators of the governor's 10-year clean fuel programs, one of the key authors, and the 10-year energy plan, And one of the key elements of the governor's 10-year energy plan is the low carbon fuel standard program, or this clean fuels program. This is also known. After proposed rules came out, the Western Petroleum Association met with the governor to discuss these proposed rules and impacts of the very program that would be permanently imposed upon families all over Oregon with Senate Bill 324. The governor and Margie Hoffman was there, Margie Hoffman being the 10-year energy advisor. And also present was Sylvia Hayes. Now, Ms. Hayes was active in that meeting. Active in the meeting
Excuse me. One moment, please, Representative. Representative Barreto yields his time. Please continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Active in the meeting, helping shape it. Now, we don't know all that happened, but we do know that is an additional fact. And finally, or I should say not finally, we know that a subpoena has been issued by the U.S. Attorney's Office. Madam Speaker, I'd like to use an additional visual aid.
Representative McLean asks permission to continue use of a visual aid. Please go forward.
Thank you. Colleagues, this is just a blow-up of some parts of the subpoena that's been issued by the U.S. Attorney's Office. Why does this vote need to be postponed? Because we have a criminal investigation occurring in Oregon. This subpoena was issued. It's been issued to develop evidence. The criminal subpoena indicates that a federal grand jury has been convened. And it talks about what that means. And it's asking for documents. And as you can see behind me, one of the information as to communications between Ms. Hayes and the governor and Palmer Mason at DEQ. They asked for those same documents at the Department of Environment Quality. And right here in the subpoena, they want documents about the low carbon fuel standards, clean energy and coal. Right there, this program is named. Senator Rosenbaum, nonsense? No evidence? Further, Ms. Hayes has sued the Oregonian to stop her emails from being disclosed. And one of her bases is the Fifth Amendment. Now, it's her right to do that, and she should do that. But it also indicates that there is serious implication associated to what the Oregonian wants to discover about her communications. And finally, colleagues, we have two glaring facts that have contributed to what the Oregonian called this fog. We had our Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate ask for the resignation of our governor. Madam Speaker, you've given your reasons publicly. I respect you. I don't agree with the decision. I respect President Courtney, but I don't agree with his decision at that time unless there was information that we didn't know. But ignoring what was going on, our Speaker, the President of the Senate, asked the governor to resign because the investigations that was so clouded concerning the governor and Ms. Hayes in this activity rendered him incapable of fulfilling his constitutional duties. And then the governor resigned. So, is that no evidence? Well, one thing's for sure, it certainly is not enough evidence to convict Ms. Hayes of any criminal activity at this point. I'm not saying that. In fact, I want her to have the process that every Oregonian should have. But I am saying this. Given what the Oregonian has called a cloud, given the surrounding aspects of not knowing who else in state government has been influenced, who else may have been paid improperly, if not illegally. Are we prepared to go today to a vote?
Excuse me, Representative. Representative Kettemer yields his time. Please continue.
Thank you. There are facts, colleagues, that we know, and then facts that we don't know. I find it today as I stand and ask this House to postpone this vote. I do so because our communities are frustrated that this bill is moving so fast. The bill to simply make permanent a program that just 2 months ago rules were final. It's March, and this bill's moving fast. In fact, in the Senate, 2 days after the governor resigned, issued his letter, the Senate moved the bill. If it was drastic enough to have Governor Kitzhaber resign, should we not pause? And yet 2 days, the Senate ran the bill. And here we are, not 2 weeks after Governor Brown was sworn in to replace Governor Kitzhaber, we are here on this floor moving this bill. It may be at the end of the investigations that there is no additional evidence of improper influence or evidence of conspiracies to defraud Oregonians cloaked in the cause of reducing carbon output. There may be no criminal indictments, and I confess I hope so. I hope there are no indictments, and I hope our worst fear about what might have happened is not true. But in a mere few weeks after the extraordinary occurrence of the resignation of Governor Kitzhaber, we find ourselves here on the floor of the House of Representatives voting on that program. This program. The process, colleagues, must be protected to ensure the trust in our system of laws and how we enact them. And we have a duty to protect the process. And that process of trust for our constituents is more important than any one vote. And it's more important than any one bill. And I don't doubt that the advocates for this program have invested a lot of time into crafting a program that will achieve their goals. I fear goals that will come at the expense of Oregon families and the poor. And I understand that those goals often invoke a utopia that never was in order to achieve the spoils of political contests. But under this cloud, do we move forward? Madam Speaker, the majority party in this chamber has the power to choose not just the ends, but the means. The means, the process, when a bill's heard. And they chose when to hear this bill, when it came to committee, and when it came to a floor. The power of one-party rule in this state is vast. Now, the voters chose that, and I respect the voters. But I can never agree with the premise that the ends justifies the means. Madam Speaker, a cloud of corruption has engulfed our state government. And in that fog, can we see clearly who sneaks in the shadows? Can we see where we're going? Let the wind of transparency clear the air before we vote on this bill. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Benz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the motion.
To the motion.
Colleagues, we've heard one reason to postpone it. Here's another. We've all heard about the transportation package. The transportation package would require a tax, a road tax. I was here in 2009 and we passed the JTA and I voted for it. It was a heavy lift going back to my district and talking about a 6-cent road tax. 6 cents. I survived politically because I had gone to each of my county commissioners and explained to them the need. At that time, there were 12. Today, there are 15. I had started those telephone calls earlier, 2 weeks ago, because it seemed to me that the need for our roads, our bridges, seismic work, all of the hundreds of millions of dollars of work that needs to be done to keep this state in business had reached a point where we needed to do something.
Representative, I don't believe this is germane to the motion to postpone indefinitely. Can you keep to the motion at hand, please?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate that correction. The reason we need to postpone this indefinitely is because it needs to be set aside until we address these other issues. It needs to be set aside so we can address this other extraordinarily important issue called the transportation system. It needs to be delayed while we take care of these issues that absolutely go to the heart and foundation of doing business in this state. This bill...
Excuse me, Representative. Representative Reed, for what purpose are you in the privilege queue?
Madam Speaker, I would like to quote from Mason's Legislative Manual, page 82. Debate on a bill is confined to the bill under consideration and does not extend to criticism of other bills before the House or in committee.
Thank you, Representative. Point is well taken, please, Representative.
Speaker, could you...
we're not talking about a transportation package. We're talking about a motion to postpone indefinitely. Representative Springer, for what purpose are you in the privilege queue?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just a point of clarification. The transportation package was addressed, I can give specific times, within the conversation of committee. And looking at our rules here, it says a member may refer to discussion or actions that have taken place in committee meetings. There were at least 4 different opportunities or times that transportation was mentioned in that committee meeting.
We are not discussing the main bill, though. We are discussing, well, let me ask for clarification. We're talking about the motion to postpone indefinitely. So let me check and confer with the clerk. Stand at ease a moment.
Because we'd like to have these other discussions, transportation, that was brought to the committee, we should table this bill.
Reasons to postpone.
Also come back to order. So not having access to the record of what did transpire in committee, I will assume that Representative Springer is speaking accurately, that some discussion of a transportation package was discussed in committee. I will also point out that is not a bill, but broadly speaking as an issue, if it was brought up in committee, the nature of this motion to postpone indefinitely does open us up back to the entire discussion of the full Senate Bill 324 and what did transpire in committee. So Representative Benz, please continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for your patience. Colleagues, the challenge for me in going back to my district and obtaining support for a tax is made that much greater by the bill that we're trying to postpone, or the motion to postpone applies to. This bill that we're trying to postpone would raise the cost of fuel. When it raises the cost of fuel, it makes it extraordinarily difficult to move on to yet another cost increase later. So I'm just saying, if we can postpone it, it would give us that opportunity that I think all of us want to take advantage of trying to have a conversation that is not already negated, if we will, or had a negative outcome preordained by virtue of the passage of this bill. That's really an unfortunate event and could be resolved by by voting for this motion. I urge and I vote.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion on the motion to postpone indefinitely. Representative Widener.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the motion.
To the motion.
Colleagues, I urge you to support this motion to postpone this and send it back to committee as well, because some of the information that was given to us, as I will recite again, in committee was the land use piece on this bill. When we would ask, was it taken into consideration and things like that, we were told in committee that no, they did not take land use into effect in committee because it was fuzzy math, the science was still out, all kinds of different things. And now we're going to make a decision on the floor without having pure poetic evidence of what is real. So the land use piece was not taken into consideration. I know some of you are shaking your head and do not understand this component of it, but this is where, when we're bringing sugarcane from Brazil, how does that factor into how much carbon is being emitted into the air? That is not done in the calculation of what we're doing. It was not taken into consideration because the science was still out on that. That is what we were told in committee. I urge you to postpone this, send it back to committee. Another reason we need to postpone this and send it back to committee?
Excuse me, Representative. This does not send it to committee. It postpones it indefinitely.
Postpone it indefinitely.
Thank you.
Sorry. To postpone this indefinitely is because I've been here since 2009, my first session as well, and involved in lots of different issues that have came across here. And the last thing I want to do today, or put any one of you in the position today of supporting a bill that might be supporting crony capitalism. With the information that has came up, I really do not want to take a vote.
Representative, please refrain from
I'm talking
potentially...
about me taking a vote.
Okay, well, be careful.
With me taking a vote, because I've had to do it before, I've watched bills go across this floor for different land use issues and different things that have went to the other side, and they come back and they're narrowed down to one piece of property, possibly, where people are negotiated out and we're not taking all Oregonians into account. And this bill appears to have that same issue. We're looking at 60 companies that would profit possibly from it, and that's it with these credits. So I urge you to support postponing this bill, sending it back to committee indefinitely, and revisiting the whole system. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion on the motion to postpone indefinitely. Representative Davis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the motion?
To the motion.
First, Madam Speaker, thank you for your indulgence, for allowing a robust debate. And colleagues, I would ask that you would vote in favor of this motion to postpone indefinitely. Timing matters. If there's anything that we know in this body, timing does matter. And one of the issues discussed at length in committee, and that has been discussed at length in every editorial, in every single discussion that I have had about this bill, is the need for investment in our transportation infrastructure in the state of Oregon. And moving this bill forward right now threatens our ability to have that discussion, threatens our ability to pass a robust package. And we can have both. Colleagues, we can have both. We don't have to make a choice between simply passing this bill and killing our hopes.
Representative Reed, excuse me, Representative. Representative Reed, for what reason are you in the privilege queue?
Madam Speaker, I think we covered the fact that the debate should be on what is in the bill, not what is not in the bill. And I can quote from Mason's again, if that helps.
Thank you, Representative. But since transportation infrastructure packages in general apparently were discussed in the committee regarding this bill, and this motion opens up a broader dialogue, we shall proceed. But thank you for the note. Representative Holvey, for what purpose are you in the privilege queue?
Point of order, Madam Speaker. I refer to Section 101 of Mason's Manual. I do not believe this debate is in order.
We will take, we'll stand at ease, take your inquiry under advisement here. Hold on a moment. Could you repeat the...
It's Section 101. Debate is limited to the question before the House.
Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker?
I have the floor right now. I'll read you that section if you like, that I'm referring to. It is out of order to refer in debate to a bill or other matters not yet reported by a committee. Neither is it in order to refer to proceedings of a committee unless the committee has formally reported its proceedings to the House. Members may not allude to nor relate in debate what was done or said in committee or by any member of the committee except such as is contained in the written report made to the House by the authority of the committee.
We are definitely enjoying our democracy today. Representative Hovey, we got some clarification, and I want to thank my clerk for pointing out. I will read Section 433 of Mason's. Motion to postpone indefinitely opens main question to debate. The motion to postpone indefinitely is debatable and opens the main question to debate. This is because any motion that proposes to make a final disposition of a question opens the merit of the question to debate. So, on the matter of whether or not we can talk about transportation infrastructure and a transportation package and the need for one, that was debated in committee or at least raised by testimony. However, I do believe, and I will rule, it is inappropriate to imply that the passage or lack of passage of a particular bill will impact another. I think if you want to talk about the transportation package and the need for infrastructure, I would ask that you stick to that and not talk about the linkage between the two. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for the clarification. Colleagues, I think as evidenced by this debate and debate in committee, the need for transportation investment in Oregon is significant. The costs imposed by Senate Bill 324A on consumers will not go towards that investment. Timing matters, and I would ask for your aye vote to postpone Senate Bill 324A indefinitely. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Hoyle, for what purpose? You're not in the queue. Are you in the queue for a second? No, you are not. Further discussion on the motion to postpone indefinitely? Seeing none, Representative McLean, would you like to close?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, colleagues, for indulging our time here. The minority does not have the votes to pass a single bill, colleagues. All we have is our voice. All we have is our voice on this floor to present our case to you, to try to persuade you, to try to influence you, to say, slow down. But the majority party gets to decide today whether we do or whether we do not. We've talked on this motion to postpone that the reason to do this is because there are yet unanswered questions as to who was paid to influence who. We don't know yet because the evidence has not been disclosed. We recently saw with Cover Oregon, when emails came out just recently, suspicions were confirmed that decisions were made for political expediency rather than policy. What will we know 2 months from now that we don't know today? If we pass this bill, we'll never know. Now, we may know and say, gosh, that would have made my decision different. But it will be too late. If you vote to postpone indefinitely today, you give Oregonians time to hear more about what criminal investigators are looking at. You give time for our ethics committee to make decision. You give time for our attorney general to come back into the investigation mode. It's been said that the timeline's been gone on a long time, but I stick with the handout that I showed you, that it's recent. It's really been since 2012 that the program has been developed. It was under Governor Kitzhaber's direction and authority. And who influenced him through Ms. Hayes? And what do they have to gain? Diane Rosenbaum and others have said, well, it's nonsense. Nonsense. There is no connection. There's no evidence whatsoever. And yet, methodically, I have shown you today there is evidence. And of course, the most glaring is the resignation of our governor. Evidence which we can view in light of what we'll know after the investigations, what we'll know after these criminal subpoenas produce evidence for the grand jury. It's important to let the process take place, colleagues. It's important to let these investigations take place. The credibility of our executive branch will take decades to recover. I hope Governor Brown is listening, because her words spoken in our House are going to be put to the test. And she will have to choose whether to live by those words or ignore them. And colleagues, we have an ability to put this on hold. I urge you to do it. Oregonians want you to put this on hold, to postpone this. We are about to spend the money of Oregonians when they go to the gas pump, and not one dime for a road, not one dime for a bridge. And to what end?
Representative, you're at time.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Representative.
Colleagues, I'm going to refer by reference what I previously talked about and not make any of you submit or sit through the next 30 minutes as we just discussed in the motion to postpone. Now, before you applause, remember decorum on the House floor. But I would like to insert that here and say this is all those reasons are reasons to vote no. I'd like to point out a couple of aspects as to the policy of this bill and why I urge you to vote no. This bill puts into permanent application to our families, in our communities, this program, enacted 2 months ago by the Department of Environmental Quality. A couple of responses. It was said by multiple representatives that this is jobs. The DEQ did hire Jack Fawcett and Associates to do an economic study. And this report came out and said 29,000 jobs are going to be brought to Oregon. Of course, that was based upon an assumption that we would have 8 to 9 ethanol plants built in Oregon. Colleagues, as of today, there were 2 built. They both went bankrupt. One of them is now a storage for fuel. Second of all, the bill has been asserted is positive because it exempts agriculture and certain aspects from having to use the fuel that's been blended. The same applies today in our blending fuel law for ships or boating on the coast. And for those who want clear fuel that's not blended, it's available for you at a price of $1.74 more a gallon in Reedsport, and I believe $1.50 more a gallon in Seaside. When you, by government edict, shrink the ability for people to legally supply a market, you do nothing but raise the price. It's simple logic. I don't believe that exemption will serve our agriculture industry or our construction industry well at all. California was brought up. California, that beacon of pure, effective, logical thought that emanates over legislatures within a certain amount of proximity. We are not California North, of course, colleagues, we are Oregon. But let's say for a moment we were California, as perhaps those who advocate for a West Block and to have a one big market might be. California, this is the information that was given to me, has only achieved 1% of its target and has now got its program on hold. Now, of course, after 10 years, they don't even hit the target we start at. My concern, colleagues, is that the policy is flawed and does nothing more than pander to some ideologue notion that is not achievable, at the cost of our families and the poor in Oregon. Now, there has been suggested other ways to do it, because we do want our children to breathe air that doesn't cause asthma. Absolutely, there's no disagreement on that. And I suppose, colleagues, today we have to ask ourselves, does this bill, are we convinced that this bill will achieve that end? And if so, are we prepared to acknowledge the cost we paid to achieve the ideology we ascribe? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion. Representative Wisnett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
Honorable colleagues, I represent the same number of people that everyone in this chamber does, and I asked my local people to give me some comments on this bill. They were in opposition. So I'd appreciate you listening, and also I'd appreciate put some faces on what we're getting ready to vote on. I submit two arguments from Central Oregon where we worry more about pollution from forest fires than cars sitting on I-84 or I-5. And we, as a body, have neglected those forests. First, Scott Cooper, who's Central Oregon's Neighborhood Impact Executive Director, provided the following responses to the question, how will SB 324 impact the economically disadvantaged and working class families in Central Oregon? Neighborhood Impact is a nonprofit which helps change lives by helping families access skills for success, access family services, financial assistance, food, housing, heat, and energy assistance. Scott Cooper began his response to the question by stating, to put it bluntly, our families are struggling. He then stated, and I don't believe half the people in this body would know this, Crook County, Republican leaders' county, unemployment rate remains the highest in the state. 90,000 jobs, we'd like 10 or 20 jobs in Crook County would make a big difference in our unemployment rate, their unemployment rate. Jefferson County, the highest rate of foreclosures in Oregon, with 1 in 87 homes in some stage of foreclosure. Rents are at an all-time high in Deschutes County. Mr. Cooper continued, listen to this, any action which changes the financial equation for families using 100% of their resources to make ends meet means choosing among and between necessities, shorting one to pay for the other. I participated in some poverty workshops, and we were giving the salary or income or revenue of a single mother with 2 children. And you have to decide, do you buy food, do you buy what you buy? Mr. Cooper says, remember, you cannot use food stamps to pay for increased fuel and energy costs. One cannot short the landlord to pay more at the pump. My second quick argument, let me remind you, recently we received the Oregon's Economist March revenue forecast, and he reported the following. The March revenue has an increased projection of $100 million. He stated the months of low gas prices have greatly benefited Oregon's economy. The Ben Chamber provided the following comments supporting this argument. Our local small businesses and working families would be disproportionately affected by the likely rise in gas prices as a result of this legislation. Also, Central Oregon's region, their local economy in large part depends on tourism. Higher gas prices means Oregonians and Californians and Washingtonians will be less likely to recreate and travel to communities such as ours, which rely on tourism. Honorable colleagues, $9.6 billion industry and provider of thousands of jobs statewide comes from tourism. Honorable colleagues, I urge you to consider the negative impact of this bill on our struggling families. I urge you to consider the importance of low gas prices for the lower and middle-class Oregonians and for Central Oregon, coastal areas, and all of Oregon's economy. Then join me and vote no. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion. Representative Whitsitt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
Senate Bill 324A, the lifting of the sunset on the low carbon fuel standard, is a bill that has the potential to devastate rural areas of Oregon. Additional gas costs, which will range from $500 million a year to several billion dollars, will be imposed on Oregonians, including those that I represent in the farthest reaches of this great state. These are often the very people living on the edge or already in poverty, who must travel 100 miles a day or more to attend school, to get to their jobs, or to go to their doctors. Klamath County has the highest per capita of veterans of any location in the state. They are often elderly and in very poor health, living on limited incomes. They must travel to Medford, to Roseburg, or to Portland from 3 to 10 hours for a round trip for medical assistance by car, since there is no public transport for them. They will be profoundly impacted by this carbon cap and trade, which will remove what few dollars they have left with which to buy food and pay rent. My district has 20% of its citizens living in poverty. We have one of the highest numbers of individuals per capita on public assistance, with some living 25 to 50 miles one way from the closest grocery store. Can you imagine what this is going to do to them? We have families trying to make a living from the land on ranches and farms. They are already experiencing extreme difficulty maintaining their farm and ranching equipment, which do not run well on already mandated ethanol fuels. The impact to my district, one of the largest in size in this state, will be profound for its citizens, its businesses, its schools. We are already in a state of near total disaster from the last recession with no end in sight. We will now be faced with yet another blow, which will keep us on our knees. I urge a no vote on this bill.
Representative Widener.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
Colleagues, today we've heard a lot of positions on this bill, about this bill. I only want to briefly tell you of my experience, what I've heard from my constituents, and what I've learned in committee. Although there are many, I have only two main points I would like to make today as we close the session. How this affects our farmers and food prices, how this affects our middle and low-income Oregonians. First, I have worked on many local farms, have friends and family that live and operate farms, and I deeply understand the hard work and extreme importance of our farming communities here in Oregon. I hope many of you are aware that farms operate on razor-thin margins, and profits are often subject to the whims of the weather. If only our farmers wouldn't have to worry about the whims of their legislature. The increase on fuel cost will increase agricultural transportation costs, along with the cost of diesel that operates farm machinery. Let's be certain, this will inevitably lead to higher costs of food and agricultural products, as farmers must adjust their bottom line by increasing the price of their products. But wait, colleagues, farmers can't adjust their prices all of the time because they're competing across the nation. And these prices sometimes are set in stone for some of the products. Some of the local organic farmers that are selling direct will be able to absorb these costs and pass them along, but many farmers will not have that ability. Secondly, the plan set by the Low Carbon Fuel Standard will continue to increase the cost of fuel as we reduce the carbon output. So as we continue to increase the price at the pump, credits will be given to natural gas, electric vehicle, and other green transportation technologies. The problem, our middle class, working class, low-income families will be paying a higher price at the pump, is what this comes down to. Low Carbon Fuel Standard Plan, other more affluent Oregonians are going to be able to afford this and absorb these costs. They're going to be able to buy natural gas vehicles and electric vehicles. Low-income families will not. Colleagues, Oregon is already a leader in low-carbon fuel standards. We're already 10 points below where California starting point is. I ask you to look at this bill very closely and what our true carbon footprint will be. This bill will create a need to import sugarcane from Brazil in addition to the corn oil to meet the increased standards, and the carbon output alone will be staggering. I don't think this bill will truly have a positive impact on the environment, but it certainly will have a negative impact on our farms, our small businesses, and most of all, our family budgets across this state. I urge a no vote.
Thank you, Representative. Further